Okay, well, welcome everybody. And today we're meant to talk about chapters 10 through 14. And I'll just start with the really lame question of like, is there anything you want to raise up? Maybe something that you liked or you didn't like, or you've got parallel thoughts, or like, hey, if I were going to edit this book, I would do the following thing. So whatever speaks to you is what's on the docket.
Well, unfortunately, we were busy with the operation, so we didn't get a chance to read the chapters.
That's very more than understandable, Tim.
And I'm sitting here a little bit dumb, asking Tim, what is the name of the book? Which book is it?
Oh, it's Living on the Plain. It's that book.
Oh, it's your book. Yes, it's your book. That's right. Our leader's book.
We read 10 through 14. Is that what you said?
Yes.
Yeah, so I had something on the beginning of chapter 12. I did a bunch of question marks that I just kind of wanted to ask about or talk about or whatever, but where it talks about Satan is similar to accuser, and in the Hebrew Bible, there's no personal force of evil opposed to God. The serpent in the Garden of Eden is not Lucifer. So is that, and then below when it talks about the accuser does a superhuman being who is likely best understood as God's chief prosecutor. I just thought that was very interesting. I kind of was hoping you could explain that a little more.
Yeah, I'd be grateful to, because it's not something, it's a strange thing, like depending on what tradition you grew up on, but most of us culturally have this idea that like Satan is like the enemy of God and fell from heaven because there was a rebellion, and better to rule in hell than to obey in heaven, right? And all of it comes from John Milton and Dante Alighieri, and none of it comes from the Bible. I'm not saying that theology is wrong, it just isn't biblical. Right. And so like what's interesting to think about is that like in Job, there is this figure called the Satan, not Satan. So Satan is a Hebrew word, and it means accuser. And so like actually this is one of the sons of God, the B'nai Elohim. And it appears like in Job that this son of God like works for God, kind of like the chief prosecuting attorney would, and does what chief prosecuting attorneys sort of do, says like, hey, God, like there's people out there that aren't so good, like I'm going to recommend you press charges. And God says, well, hey, look, there's this like really good guy out there. And the chief prosecuting attorney says, well, look, this guy's only good because, I mean, you give him everything he wants, so like, in the Job story, it's like I think like you could think like, is this story about why bad things happen to good people? And I don't think so. I think the story is like asking the question, how do you know somebody really loves you? Like, do people just love you because of what you give them, or do people love you because of who you are? So does Job love God because God gives Job stuff, or just like Job love God no matter what? It seems like an interesting way to read the story to me, but it's really clear that like the Satan has access to God, goes around in heaven. So it's not like this enemy evil thing, right? And it turns out that by the time we get to the time of Jesus, it doesn't seem like that's changed a lot. Like the whole idea about these like sons of darkness doesn't come from the Bible. It comes from these people called the Essenes who lived at Qumran. These were people who believed that everybody should live like a priest. So they were all celibate. They all washed themselves 5 times a day. They ate very, very particular like priestly food. And they sort of decided mainstream Judaism was too like secularized. So they wanted to like be this elect community. And oddly enough, they don't call the Romans the sons of darkness. They call like their fellow Jewish people that don't do what they're doing the sons of darkness. And this is like how historically the word diabolos becomes like devil figure instead of what it really means, which is slanderer. So I'm not saying there's no devil, but I am going to say it doesn't even make sense why there would be one, or like how it got so much power if God made it. You know, like it doesn't make sense. And beyond that, like I think there's this great invitation in the words themselves that like something that frankly is like diabolical is slander and accusation. And maybe that's not true for everybody, but I'll tell you, like as a perfectionist and workaholic, like the kind of diabolical self-dialogue I get is like, that's no good, you're no good, you're not making a difference, nobody cares. And I don't know if those things are like evil, but I know they sure can hold me back from enjoying life and like meaningfully interacting with other people. And I maybe this is just my own personality type. Like, I don't even know what life would be like if I didn't have to contend with those accusations and slander all the time. I can't even imagine it. I find myself thinking like, hey, if that weren't happening, I'd probably just be lazy, which is what us perfectionist workaholics do. We live in either or. So it's sort of like, hey, if I wasn't constantly working, I would do nothing, you know, like, which is probably not true. But it's like this way I talk myself into staying into this tough spot, you know? And so it, like, what's really interesting to hear is that our Jewish brothers and sisters don't believe in the devil. They don't believe in like this red clad horned thing. They believe in like this sort of spirit that they call the Yetzer Hara, which is like, it means the spirit of evil, but it's not like evil with claws on Halloween. It's sort of this spirit that's like, hey, like you could do this good thing and it might be good for you, but it wouldn't be best for your community. So they sort of say that temptation is like actually really a good thing because it pushes you to go beyond yourself. So resisting the Yetzer Hara is like good, because if the temptation to like didn't show up, people wouldn't push past it to do incredible things.
Hey, Mike.
Yes, sir.
If the Jews don't believe in evil, how do they understand Hitler?
Well, Jewish people do believe in evil. They just don't believe it's embodied in a spiritual being that's like the adversary of God that flies around trying to steal your soul.
Oh, okay.
And mostly that's because, Tim, most Jewish people don't believe in hell as an eternal destination. And it's a weird thing to think about, right? Like we do this weird stuff, you know, Dante and Milton, you know, like they're interesting literary figures, but like if you read Revelation carefully, like there's a lake of fire and the dragon gets thrown into the lake of fire, but like fire doesn't like torture you, like it burns you up to nothing. So if you read Revelation not even carefully, there's not like a fiery hell to like torment you perpetually. It's the destruction of all that is like not loving or hopeful or joyful or peaceful. So it's the destruction of accusation. Like, you know, the tradition I grew up in, you know, we were actively afraid that like the devil had a plan to destroy your life, and the devil was taking as many souls to hell as possible to suffer eternal torment with himself. And that the devil was going to like fight this cosmic battle at Armageddon against God. But, you know, like that's so nonsensical when you think about it. Like if there's a devil, it's like created by God. So how can a created being have enough power to like overthrow the creator? That just seems strange. And this whole eternal torment stuff just really seems outside of like a graceful, loving God. I just, you know, like I can't understand why God would punish somebody forever, horrifically, for something they did that was very temporally bound. You know, like if you tell a lie, that has a shelf life. Like lies don't last forever, actually. So why would you punish somebody forever when they did something that didn't last. Beyond that, if I'm really honest, I don't usually think when I'm mad, like, ooh, Lord Satan, I want to do something really evil. Usually my worst decisions, like I thought I was going to do something that was going to be helpful for me. I mean, when I look back, I'm like, wow, that was not a good use of my energy or time. But in the moment, it seemed really important to exercise righteous anger and tell people they can go to hell. But that wasn't because I was trying to like join the Lord of evil and darkness. Like at the time, it seemed like a really good idea. Like when my kids do stuff that I think is wrong and like I act like punitively, I do it because I want them to like not do that again. Not because like I want to ruin their lives. Like when I'm a harsh parent, it's because I'm like trying to be a parent and I don't know what else to do in the moment. It's better if I don't do anything in the moment, but like, we'll talk about that later.
Hey, Mike, if I'm having a little problem wrapping my head around Satan. He was in, when Jesus went to the desert, wasn't that Satan that was tempting him?
Well, not exactly. So this is the funny bit, right? The word Satan means accuser, and it's not a personal name in Hebrew. It's not. Like in Job, it's not Satan goes before God. The scripture reads, the accuser went before God. The Hebrew is clever, right? Like when you have a personal name, like Mike or Tim, you don't put a definite article in front of it. So I'm not the Mike, I'm Mike. And you're not the Tim, you're Tim, right? Names in Hebrew are funny though, because they mean stuff. Like in English, like most people don't know what their name means. Or we'll name our kids attributively. We name them because of some person or some family legacy. So like a different thing. In Hebrew, your name means something and it's who you are, right? Like Jacob means thief and that's who he is. David means beloved and everybody loves him, right? So there's a real difference in Hebrew between David and the David. The David would mean one who is beloved. David means the guy, David, with the name David. So it's hard to know when you read the New Testament because the theology is really young. Is there a Satan with a capital S in the Bible anywhere? Or is there a role called the accuser? I hope that makes sense. Like when you hear this word diabolos, we get the word devil from that, but diabolos means slanderer.
So who was tempting Jesus then?
Well, I don't know if it's a who as much as it is like Jesus is tempted by slander. Like, aren't you? I like to think through the temptations anyway, right? Like I've always heard like the temptations are these insidious ways to bother Jesus. But I mean, really, if you could change rocks into bread, you could feed the world, no problem. That seems like a good thing to me. It doesn't seem like wicked to feed the world. So what's the temptation? I mean, like most scholars would tell you, the temptation is that people expected the Messiah to solve all their problems. And if you can turn rocks into bread, you'll solve everybody's food problems. That's like a good thing, except like God fundamentally chose not to do our work for us. The mystery of the incarnation is God chose to join us, not fix us. And I do love the Native American theology we read that says like, hey, stones are like our ancestors, right? So this is really about like disrespecting the primacy of the earth and sort of like this power play that isn't yours to make. I mean, that makes sense to me, actually. Is it a figure doing it, or is Jesus tempted by this like idea and opportunity? And I don't know the answer to that. It seems like it could just as well be one as the other.
So sorry, my dog's barking a little bit. Somewhere in there, I thought you kind of were saying it's like negativity too, right? Am I understanding that right? Like there's not this like being or whatever, but there's just like, it's like something that draws us, there's something that draws us to do negative things or things that go against what God would want us to do. But like you said, it's not this person. And I find that really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, like the scriptures go really far. There's not like disembodied evil flying around. You think about when there's an unclean spirit and it's manifest in a body. Like when Jesus drives out the legion of spirits, they're like, oh my, like, Lord, we can't just float around in the air. Can we be embodied in the pigs? I don't love that story, but it does talk about how like any kind of oppositional stuff is embodied. It's not like, there's all these books about spiritual warfare and these like spirits flying around all over the place. And like, I just don't need that. Like, I don't need that to live my life. Like if that's life-giving for you, I don't want to take it away. But like, I just don't see why all that's necessary. Like, the scriptures say each person's tempted when they're drug away by their own desires. That's what we read in Hebrews, not from like a red figure with horns and a spade tail. Each person's tempted when they're drug away by their own desires. Usually those desires are pointing at something good. Like they're from a place that is going to hopefully meet my needs, but often that's at the expense of other people or even at myself. So I think like temptation is about like the ends justify the means. Or, again, like I go about trying to meet my needs in a way that's not helpful, like addiction in general, whether you're an exercise addict or you're like a bulimic, you're trying to meet some kind of need, like to be loved or like to control your life or to be seated in your body, but it's actually harmful to you the way you're doing that. I would call it diabolical, right? Because like if you've got like workaholism, which is just like drug abuse, it's an addiction. You're trying to meet your needs of dignity and value, but it's going to be destructive to you. And I would call it diabolical because the voice of addiction says you're not good enough unless you blank. Lila, I think you started. I'm sorry.
No. Can you hear me?
Yes, now I can.
Can you just talk a little bit more about the unclean spirit? That's not mental illness, is that right? So yeah. What is that?
Yeah, unclean spirit, and that's the word demon in Greek. So demon, D-A-E-M-O-N, is a Greek word that means unclean spirit. It does not mean demon, oddly enough. Like it's just a Greek word that means unclean spirit. And we talked a little bit last week about what unclean spirits are. And I think there's stuff that bothers us or that leaves like residues that are hard to clean up. Like unclean spirits aren't earned or deserved. For example, like somebody who was neglected when they're 2. I know one of those people very well. There's nothing fundamentally wrong with those people. They didn't earn or deserve that treatment. They were babies, right? And yet there's a residue that all the research I've read says they'll never be able to completely reconcile. Like the world will not be linear for somebody who was neglected as an infant, will not be linear. It will be random and chaotic. That's how they will experience life. They can pretend the world's linear, but they'll only be pretending. I find that research very disturbing, but I also find it to be accurate.
Thank you, Mike.
I mean, I would go so far as to say, look, we struggle with unclean spirits, and what's been really helpful is like the DSM-5 says, if you've got depression is a mental illness. And depression is defined as like 2 or more major depressive incidents. If you've had 2 or more major depressive incidents, you have a mental illness. Well, there's a lot of people with a mental illness, it turns out, just in the depression category. That doesn't mean there's something fundamentally wrong with them. Depression is like an unclean spirit. It's like it's difficult for us to explain. Like, how is it that people who are well-educated and productive and have a lot of things going great in their life can become depressed? I can't explain that in my own life. And there's no like solving that. It's not like you can say like, well, I just choose not to be depressed anymore, and that's going to take care of it. It doesn't work. Like, there's a spiritual quality to it that is like very difficult. And, you know, again, it's like this interesting thing. When you get into the research about, you know, like, for example, drug addicts, it's not like you go to rehab and then like you don't have that problem anymore. Like the big book says, like, when you're an addict for life, and you're either going to live into sobriety or you're going to like fall off the wagon, right? And so like, if you go to an NA meeting, people will say like, my name is Frank and I'm a drug addict and I've been sober for 25 years. And you might think, well, geez, Frank, give yourself a break. Like, you're not a drug addict anymore. But Frank is very well aware that door back into like the hell of drug addiction is well paved in his brain. He knows exactly how to get there. And there's like knocking on that door all the time. And Frank knows not to open that door, but man, I know where that door is. I hear those voices calling me, and I could open it in a second. And I think it's the same with perfectionism and workaholism and whatever you put in there.
That's what I was thinking. I was thinking, you know, somebody who's outstandingly good at what they do because they focus so hard on that job, on that task, on that responsibility. They're a little bit addicted.
I mean, you just like, what we don't do well, I think, is differentiate between socially acceptable addiction and like socially unacceptable addiction. It's socially acceptable to be a workaholic because you get stuff done, but like, it's deleterious to your well-being and to your family, like it is. But like but because it's acceptable, like you can do it, you know, like you can do that. And I think that's like what an unclean spirit is.
Thank you, Mike. I appreciate that.
Yeah, if I can go out on a limb even more and make even a worse claim, right? Like we, you know, since the late 70s, we use this term PTSD to describe like what veterans come back with like shell shock, you know? And what's funny, right, is we call it post-traumatic stress disorder. So you've got this stress that happens after trauma, right? And like it keeps coming back. And like, I got this really great explanation of this that hopefully is helpful for you guys and girls from a therapist that I saw. And it sort of goes like this. Imagine like this, oh gosh.
Lost your mind.
Yeah, here we go. Imagine this line is your breaking point. Like, this is where you have a breakdown. And everybody starts down here. So there's like a lot of room between here and your break point, right? Like, you can lose your keys, you can have a setback at work, like your kid mouths off to you, and then like you go to bed and you can come back down and reset, right? So there's like a lot of things need to happen before you have a nervous breakdown. If you've got PTSD, the floor has been raised. So like, there's not actually very much that happens before you have a nervous breakdown, because like your floor has been raised. Like, there's people who can fly off the handle because you forgot to say hello to them. That's not like normal behavior. What it's telling you is that their threshold's been raised. So I read this book that said, use this really interesting turn of phrase. Like, we love to call it PTSD, but that's optimistic because we're not post to that trauma. We might as well call it TSD. We've got traumatic stress disorder because stuff that happened 20 years ago is still like stressing us the heck out. And like we can sort of heal those wounds, but look, there's going to be scars there. You know, it's not like it's never going to have happened. And do we want that anyway? Because we'd be losing parts of ourselves. But I think all of this is like what's behind unclean spirits. It's like ancient people were not dumb. Like it's this sort of catch-all phrase that is like, there's like something inexplicable happening in folk. And sometimes we look at those folk and we say, it's because you earned or deserved it. Therefore, stay outside the camp. But what I see Jesus doing is saying, like, come back in the camp. Come back in the camp. Yeah.
That's a really good description of PTSD. And that's what I have, and that's why I have a dog.
Yeah.
Power is pretty difficult, and it's really brutal. And what I do is I reach for new life.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think it's really helpful. And I just want to bolster my case with one more stat, by the way, that the DoD did a study that more veterans than ever have PTSD following their military service, more veterans than ever. And the study revealed that more service people have PTSD going into their military service than ever. Like teenagers with PTSD go serve in the military because where else are they going to go? They're not going to college. I mean, the DoD said this, not like the Pew Foundation or like the Yellow Dog Democratic Study Group of Vermont. Like this came from the most conservative entity that there is. And I think
healthy. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Please, no, that's it.
Well, just to tag on what you said, it's very healthy to think about, to rethink of it instead of post-traumatic stress, to think that it's to drop the P and that it's just something to continue to deal with. I think it's very healthy to recognize that. And then along the lines of, thinking of unclean spirit and how that's something just kind of all part of our lives. Perhaps if we could even rename it and not think of it as unclean, because that too is judgmental or evaluative. I don't know what a better adjective would be, but it's something that is another side or something there that just kind of inherent. We'll have to think of another way to describe it.
Well, what we're doing, Adele, now is we're calling it neurodiversity. When people have like autism or they have Asperger's, instead of saying like, oh, you're autistic, we now say like, oh, like there's neurodiversity in the world. And that's true.
Yes, I like that.
There's a little bit of that in everybody in the screen. I'm suspicious, right? Some of us have socially acceptable neurodiversity. So I do think there's probably a lot of spiritual diversity.
Spiritual diversity.
And some of it can work against us. And some of it, like, to be honest, like if we just could like help that part of our spirit do what it's trying to do, it would really serve life really well. Instead of getting rid of it, like if we could retask it, that'd be cool.
Mm-hmm.
So along those lines of getting rid of it and like making spirits clean, and like, doesn't Jesus do that?
Yeah, and I wonder if it isn't like what he does is not like kill that part of somebody's spirit, but sort of says like, hey, how about instead of telling Mike or Julia like they can't sit still, what if you manage them and said time for a break? Like what if you enforce taking breaks instead of enforcing not taking breaks? Like what if you did that? Because you're a good enforcer, like you do a good job keeping the schedule. So what if you just like did the other thing? And that sounds more like what Walter Wink was saying in his book about reconciling the powers than annihilating them.
Well, I think also there's like this loving acceptance that Jesus offers to like all of the unclean spirits, you know, like he pulls them in when nobody else wants to. He includes them, that like radical inclusion.
Yeah, and I understand in the healing narratives that, like, you know, people who have dropsy or people who have like apparently scoliosis, like, don't have that anymore. But I actually see the greater effect is like those people who have been told like they deserve it and they don't belong to the community, like all of a sudden get to join the community again. Like they're not pushed out. Like people with a birthmark on their face aren't told that they're ugly. The birthmark doesn't go away. Like that's the important thing, right? Like, because there's nothing wrong with having a birthmark. That's not like evil or makes you deficient. It's like not normal. It doesn't meet like culturally agreed upon standards of beauty. It doesn't make you ugly. And you didn't earn or deserve that, right? So like, I don't know that Jesus would take away somebody's wine-stained birthmark on their eye. I think probably he would be like, wow, you're like incredibly beautiful with that.
So then, I mean, going back to like depression and like, I don't know what I'm going to say, but like, I feel like there's just this active process that, I don't know, I'm going to have a hard time articulating this. I feel like there's an active process of things that should or can be done to like, I don't know, work against those temptations or something, you know, like, but I feel like it's like I don't know, it's a very active process, you know, like it's a conscious choice and an active process of like choosing to do certain things versus other things, you know, to like,
but you have to have someone, I feel like you have to have someone that can guide you and direct you towards the alternatives. I'm not sure, maybe someone can jump in and help me out, that it just happens automatically from your heart. I mean, I think sometimes, yes, but there's a need for human beings to step in. That's, I don't know if I'm making any sense, but
yeah, Garcia, I think you are, which is why, like, if you're an addict, like you go to meetings.
yes,
you go to meetings with other people that, like, instead of like feeling sorry for you, like have your experience. And hopefully, like, and this is true, like if you don't believe that you can change or you're worth changing, you're probably not recovering.
no.
So like you're with a bunch of people who have like seen the gritty side of their life, but they also refuse to be subjected by that. And I think the other part is, right, like what the wisdom of those folk is, if you think, boy, I'm going to have to do this struggle every day for the next 40 years, you're going to relapse because that's depressing. So you say, like, what can I do today? What can I do today? Just today, right? And like you have people in your life who say like, hey, that feeling's really, really tough. And it may not be there tomorrow. You know, like they do this good reminder, which is not dismissive. It's true, right? Like, hey, that feeling is really tough. I see it. And it might not be there tomorrow, you know? So like there is something to be said for perseverance.
You know, this reminded me, I did my master's in counseling children and students in schools. And we would talk about half days. You know, can the kid that misbehaves, you know, just half day between now and noontime. You're not going to get into any trouble, or you're just going to, you've got the schedule, you know where to go to class, blah, 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 and just make it to noontime. But you got to have a partner or someone who's reinforcing that. It's now noon. Now you've got to get to 4 o'clock. And that's not, you know, part of it is lunchtime, so that's not bad. So it's it's really hard work.
Yeah, my kid used to be on an IEP and he needed a sticker every minute. The teacher needed to give him a sticker every minute he was behaved. That was in his plan. Mom and I were like, that's crazy. One a day will do. And it was too big of a gap. You know what I mean? Like you went from one thing to the other, and that's not like interval training. You know, like the logical thing for us would be like 2 minutes and then 4 minutes.
4 minutes.
You know, you know, that's how you like build, you know, if you go from 1 minute to a whole day, you're going to tear your ACL. Like that's not, it's not sustainable.
Did he ever get to half days? I mean, I don't know.
We got rid of the sticker thing. You know,
okay.
We did.
Good for
get
you.
rid of the sticker thing. And then we fell prone to like Ptsd ourselves because we were getting notes home every day from a teacher, notes home like kid chewed on his shoelaces. I mean, he was 7. Like, why did you need to send me a note home? Where we realized the craziness of it, we got a note home. I don't think your son likes me. I was like, wow, he's 9. You're an adult. Like, I couldn't care less if he likes you. Like, why is that a note home on a behavior colored piece of paper? That's when we realized the insanity that we had bought into.
So deal with it. You're a teacher. You signed the contract.
I mean, you're an adult and the kid's 9.
Yeah.
He's 9. You know, like he's 9. And that's not a behavior note. I don't think your kid likes me. Well, I don't like you either if you're going to send notes like that home. Like, that's just preying on our stress. And so, like, I think, not to say the teacher was bad, right? I think that's a lot of what Jesus was encountering. Like, oh, your child doesn't like me. And Jesus' ministry is like, kid, you're all right. Like, that's okay. And grown up, like, let's just like put that aside. Let's put that aside so that you can be a teacher that like models maturity.
You know, I think, you know, you can't give what you don't have, right?
Yeah.
So like, she's probably trying really hard to,
this was his only male teacher. Like, this was the only one we had. Yeah. That's why it was super weird too, right? Because it came from the male teacher. Oh,
but I think that's really true. That you can't give what you don't have. And so I don't know. Anyway.
I think if we come back to the temptation episode in the wilderness, there, instead of like Jesus being tempted to Satanism, which like, how would that be tempting for the guy, right? Like, that just is nonsense. Instead, like, I think the question is like, when are we tempted to do good things through like not the best means, like most of the time, right? When are we tempted, and for me, like to maximize, to do the best thing instead of being satisfied with what we've got? A lot. I'm tempted to do that a lot. And I can give in to that temptation or I can resist it.
Do you think that perhaps when Jesus was being tempted, that was the second thoughts that he was having in his human side?
Yeah, and that human side never goes away. Like, that's the whole point of the incarnation, right? I think it's always there. And man, even when I do some of my best stuff, I got lots of second thoughts.
So maybe this was all his humanity coming out.
I hope so. And I think the challenge for us is like, how does that match your humanity?
Yeah.
I don't remember what chapter it was in, but talking about the lineage of Jesus. Oh yeah, it's your chapter 11.
Yeah.
I don't know. I always, it seems like it's so obvious, you know, but then like, if you take it at this other level of like, oh, okay. Yeah. So am I. Like, I am also, you know, a child of God, a daughter of God, you know. I don't know. It's a, I don't know. I don't have great things to say, but it was something that stuck out to me.
I mean, it's a fairly bold claim. We're getting ready to like use all this language again, like Jesus is the son of David. No, he isn't. I mean, the story is clear. Joseph is not that guy's dad. Not.
Yeah, and I think I never really recognized that. I don't know where it is. Let's see. Like it's like in parentheses, as was supposed. Jesus, when he began his ministry, was about 30 years of age, being the son, as was supposed, of Joseph. I never really, I don't know. I thought that was kind of interesting. It's very like, oh, okay, as was supposed. I don't know. There's just a lot of stuff in these chapters in general that I appreciated. The history over time that was really helpful in like elucidating some of the thoughts about things. I think you talked about like original sin. That's just kind of crazy. And then like passing on the sin gene, like it's just, I don't know, just how, and I guess that's the other thing I was thinking about is like, how could there just be like one right interpretation of all of this? You know, like it just seems so interesting to like look back at some of this history of how, you know, different things have shaped our understandings and beliefs. And then like to have like just this really strong pressure to say that there is like one right belief. And that if you don't have that belief, then, you know, you're going to hell or whatever. It just seems so like nearsighted, which is so interesting because I think for a long time I was like, oh, okay, yes. You know, like it was just like, I would just, you know, eat that up with a spoon and be like, okay. And then I don't know, it's very, very interesting to me. Anyway, so I really appreciated the history that you wrote about in several of these chapters. That was helpful for me.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, we often find ourselves when somebody does something wrong, we're like, oh, that's just human nature. But that's Augustine's idea. And it's just one idea. I mean, actually, like evolutionarily, like people are pretty good about raising like young, you know, like we're hardwired to take care of babies and puppies. If somebody hates puppies, they probably have an unclean spirit. There, I said it on TV, right? I mean, you know, like it doesn't mean that they're evil or something, but like we've evolved to take care of puppies. Like we have, like the puppy like plays at our evolution that we find it cute. And puppies are born trusting human beings. This is like new research that the puppy trusts humans. We made them that way. That's how we domesticated them. But like, you know, I don't know most people that look at babies and are like, what an ugly baby, or like, what an evil thing, you know? Usually we don't call kids evil till they're like 8. But I worry about people that think babies are evil because like we evolved as mammals to take care of young things. Like we did. To not take care of young humans or to find them like evil or offensive is against our evolution. Like you see this play out at the zoo where like the tiger mom loses all of her tiger cubs and is depressed, so they give her some puppies, and and the tiger raises the puppies to be her litter of tigers, which by the way is called an ambush, in case you're curious. This ambush of tigers is actually dogs, and like they live together their whole life and they're super happy. That's our evolution as mammals, which is interesting, right? I mean, so like Augustine, if you read that section, decided humans were like selfish because babies cry all the time. All they think about is what they want. Well, that's one way to think about it. Another way to think about it is they can't meet their own needs. And like we evolved that way. So like it takes a community to meet the kids' needs. You could call it selfish, or you could call it trusting. I know that I enjoy meeting my kids' needs more when I consider them trust-based instead of selfish-based. I think that's true of every parent. And actually what's hard as kids get older is we confuse the two. Because you don't really need me to do that. You can do that yourself. Instead of, like this is a call to be in relationship by tending to your physical needs. And I can meet your emotional needs without meeting your physical needs. Like you can do that yourself and I still love you. You know, like what a different approach than you lazy, you
I said, you could go to PTA meetings, Mike.
Oh, I've been to PTA meetings. Oh man. I want to write sometimes like, hey, parents, take a lesson from your children and how to behave properly.
Yes. So that's basically
let your kids show you the way.
Yeah. That's basically what I'm saying. Yeah.
Yeah.
Is that all right if I go to another chapter?
Oh, please, please.
In the last few minutes,
please.
10 minutes. So I was just, before we got on, reading chapter 14 and radical vision. And it's in scripture where his hometown people are unhappy with him, with the way he's preaching to them and so forth, and they run him out. And when I read the scripture first, before I got into the book, I guess my first reaction to some of the things that Jesus said were like, I felt that it was like he treated everybody in the town the same way. He made a generalization about that none of them could hear him or would ever listen to him. And he's, referred to scripture as his reference. And I thought, well, couldn't there be just one or two people in there? And he's making too broad a brush. And so would you address that, your thoughts about that part of the, as well as what you said.
I actually love that question. And it makes me think like, hey, I mean, like we use colloquialisms and idioms all the time. Like it's just what we do linguistically. And like, I love to be precise in language some of the time. Like, I just don't see, I just don't think Jesus was a walking computer. I mean, if he was, he's not a compelling figure at all. Like who wants to learn from a computer? So look, the guy's an embodied guy. He uses patterns of speech. Did he use analogies that were like sports based? Probably. I mean, because we do that all the time, like even non-athletes, you have to talk about things being home runs or like strike two or all that kind of stuff is what we do, right? Like it's just the way we talk, That's why I think we just need to take him seriously and not like always literally.
Jesus seriously.
Yeah.
The other thing that's weird, right, is like we have these stories, which are like sometimes really great stories, but we don't have any tone. Mm-hmm. There's no stage direction in these stories. Like a lot of times I'm like, I wonder how that was like tonally done, or I wonder what the body language was, like when Jesus says to Peter, "You're Peter, and on this rock I'll build my church." Was he like pointing at Peter, or was he like pointing somewhere else? I mean, that would really change the meaning, wouldn't it? Right? Like that rock over there, that one, that's where I'll build a gathering. You know, like that's, I mean, but we don't know that. Like we don't know, which means like there's got to be ambiguity, and that's not necessarily bad, you know. And I don't know. Like I think I could get in front of somebody and say in a sermon, like, I know what you're thinking, and you may not be thinking what I'm getting ready to say at all, but like that's just something that we do. I know what you're thinking. It's like a device storytellers use to like connect with the audience and bring about a surprise, you know, like maybe we could be more gentle. You might be thinking, but they mean the same thing. I'm pretty sure he's right that most people would get mad with God's vengeance actually being forgiveness. I think most people would get mad about that, because like that's a cool idea for me, like it's real sweet, but in the real time, like when I'm like really mad at somebody, if you told me that, I would be mad at you.
I did really connect with that idea of it, thinking about forgiveness versus vengeance or getting even. I mean, I do think for a lot of people, getting even is not only the making, you know, right, you know, what you took you and restoring, but I think it's also getting even in the pain. You know, you caused me pain, I'm going to get even with you and give you pain. I think people, you know, that we, in that moment, that's what we're thinking. But I do really appreciate the idea. Again, trying to turn it and thinking about forgiveness instead of, you know, vengeance.
You know, I got to be careful when I say this, but I'm going to anyway. I think back about some of the things I did as a parent that was meant to like correct my kids. You know, like one time my son threw a piece of paper out the window and I was infuriated because we don't litter. Like that's not a family value. So he got to pick up an entire bag worth of trash. Like I just pulled over and said, here's a bag and you go fill it up, right? This is how you make that right. And of course, there were like 75 more pieces of trash in that bag than he put down, right? And the thing I wanted to make sure was that he did not enjoy that experience, because I did not want him doing it again. I wanted him to like suffer the bad outcome of having done that. And that's so crazy, because maybe he could have found his calling in life by cleaning up other people's messes. Like, why should that be punishment? It's really just about like, how do we fix what we did? So picking up a piece of trash plus 2 might have been enough, you know, like it might have been enough. Because, you know, like you fix what you did plus some interest, you know, like that would have been maybe enough. I decided to make it really draconian because that's me, you know, and like, I don't want my kid to enjoy fixing his mistakes. And what a sad lesson that was. Like fixing your mistakes should be really joyful. So like, hey, if we can't find the paper you dropped, let's pick up a couple other pieces and then we'll call it quits, because we're going to hope some other people do this too. Pick up stuff that wasn't necessarily their own, but they do it on behalf of the rest of the world, or they do it because, hey, I was, you know, like hasty and made a decision out of my values. So I'll go back and like, try to like fix that out. So like, why should restorative justice be like painful? But me as a parent, like, I don't want my kid doing that again, so I want there to be this punishment element. But that's silly. I mean, like the vengeance is just making it right. It's not about you also being hurt.
Parenting is complicated.
Oh, look, I mean, by the way, I'm going to do this today with my daughter at least 7 times. Like, I'm going to have like the bad kind of vengeance. Like, I'm going to. And then I'll be mad at her because she's mad at me. Like, this is what we do. Like, we punish our kids vengefully, and then we can't understand why they're mad at us.
Right.
Meanwhile, if we went to work and our bosses treated us the way, like this other way, oh, you better believe, like we would file a lawsuit. We would be super angry. We would blow up social media about how like petty our bosses are, you know, like, what are they trying to take our joy away from our job? What entitles them to do? Yeah, I mean, like let's just be honest about that.
Do you have a bishop that comes to listen to your sermons and says, that's a wonderful sermon. You have great sermons.
No, the bishops preach when they come.
Oh, okay.
I don't know if they watch our content. I mean, I got to be honest, I don't watch other people preach. I think it's really boring.
Well, yeah, I mean,
I watch my own work. I do not watch these videos. Like, I cannot ever do that. Even reading this book that I wrote is like somewhat painful for me. So like, I think it's a good book, but like, it's sort of like, you know, I would do it better now, you know, like, or why was I thinking I was going to write about that thing, you know, like, ultimately, by not reviewing it, I'm able to make content, because if I had to review it, I'd never turn it in.
I appreciate your comment just now, when you're referring to like our work environment versus say our home environment. And I have reflected on that I treat my colleagues differently and professionally and probably better, you know, and more forgiving or letting things go versus the people I love the most, you know, and you know, I know with my kids and growing up that I was often reminded they, you know, behave the worst at home for you because they trust you, and that's, you know, that's the home environment, but they go back into the school and the teachers and they are perfect and everybody loves them. And that's so true. You know, how we sometimes, you know, we are more ourselves, of course, in our home with the people we love the most. And it's, you know, something we keep working on, but that's certainly see it in my life.
You know, Adele, if it's okay to resonate with that, like the trouble I get to at home is I use the word should with my kids. Like, you should know better. When I'm teaching other people's kids, who knows what they learned, you know, and I can be real professional and patient because they're not mine. With my kids, I'm like, look, I already told you this 19 times. Why are you doing that again? You know, to be honest, like, if I could treat every incident that bothers me like as an independent incident, I'd probably be really cool. The problem is I'm like, I remember 7 years ago when you put that gum wrapper under the chair, and now look, there's a straw on the floor and you're just committed to ruining the planet. Like, we take the weight of memories and we just like add them up and then multiply by 1,000. And like that, I think that's why our kids stress us out. Yeah. Or spouses, you know, like, boy, like, I'm not going to pretend like we don't like multiply our reactions to each other as spouses either. Because it's like, well, we talked about that before, and now I see you doing this again. So are you rebelling against what I told you? Or I just forgot. That's where I think like memory can sometimes do us some harm, you know? And I do think like people we know well sometimes get more of our wrath than people we don't know well.
Well, because we don't know necessarily what the consequences may be if we express our wrath at someone else, but we do know within our, you know, relationships of people we know better.
And you know what we don't realize, like, and I think we know this when we talk about a meeting like this, right? Like, the consequences of expressing my wrath is I'm going to hurt my relationship with you. That's the real consequence. Mm-hmm. But in the moment, I think you need to learn a lesson. And the way I'm going to rub it in is with anger and vitriol, because then you'll really learn. And what they'll learn, right, is mom's angry.
Yeah. Stay out of her way.
Kind of sad.
What is what we got, Tim. I mean, it is sad, and it's what we got. And look, I'm going to go home and do it today. I know it's sad. I'm going to go do it because, and I'm not blaming anybody, that's our legacy of how we parent and like what our social expectation is, right? Like, you know, like, look, I'm in a school community. If a kid does something wrong and other adults, like other parents, don't see that kid punished, they're out for blood. They're like, well, you're not going to like, we didn't see any punishment of that kid. That's because it's none of your business.
You know, that that is exactly the reason why I chose not to have any children. I didn't want to do what my dad did to me, and I didn't want to have a child have a speech problem like I had. So I chose not to have children.
And you know, just I'm on the other side of it, and there's like having children does not need to be normative like we've decided socially. I think that's unfortunate that we've done that. But I think that actually that sensitivity in you, Tim, would have made a huge difference. I just want to say that. I appreciate your sensitivity. And
he actually, I have two children that he helped raise from they were teen years, from teenagers, and they love him. And he loves them, and they're good friends, and you know, we have, you know, thank you, Jesus, we have a pretty good relationship, and you know, their father left the picture a long time ago, and that's just the way it is, and they're all right.
See, I struggle with a different kind of hubris. I'm like, there was a train wreck in my parenting. I'll show my parents. I'll do it perfect. And then like 5 minutes later, I find myself saying like, oh, that terrible thing my parents did was awful. And it got me where I am. So here you go, kiddo. Good enough for me. Oh, me. I don't know if this is really what the gospel's about, but I think it's real. I think it's real. And going back to the chapter we didn't talk about, like, I do wonder, like, you know, about baptism being this thing we do as a community where, like, I think we get the script right. I'm just not sure we get the follow through right. Like we say when we do this, I'll do everything in my power to raise you in the church. And then like, we don't do anything in our power. But it was really a sweet moment, you know, like it's sort of this like covenant that we make that would be really good to circle back to, like keep circling back to, like, hey, we made vows that we were going to support you in your life and faith, even though we've never met. And like, that's an okay vow to make. We don't only have to support people we know or we've met. Like there's other ways we can be supportive. And, you know, like washing off all of the stuff that gets between us and God, knowing that that's not just sin, that could be accusation and slander and anxiety. Like that seems like a pretty high calling for baptism.
Do you ever go back to rebaptize? Have people ever come up and say, oh, I want to be rebaptized? You know, I don't know why it come into my head, but
yeah, usually I say no, Graziella, because I say the first time worked, but I do say like, let's renew your baptism, let's renew our vows together. And, you know, like on the baptism of the Lord, which this year will be January the 16th, I do go ahead and like take a stick and fling water on people so that you can have that like tangible physical memory of like water hitting you and it being a little bit cool and shocking.
Yeah. You know, having been raised as Catholic, going to confession, raised by nuns, I mean, you know, in a school with nuns, run by nuns, and you went to confession once a week. Every Friday, we would line up and kids would, you know, bless me, Father, for I have sinned. And then these kids would be real loud so that the kid down the line waiting would hear whatever they were saying. But it, in some ways, in many ways, it's a sweet memory of these people, these children putting their soul out there and really knowing that my friend is hearing this but I'm doing the right thing. I don't know if I'm verbalizing this accurately, but
well, Graciela, what I love about you is you have a very positive memory of this, and most Roman Catholics I meet found it very negative. But really? I love that you look for the positive in it. I do. Like it's like hopeful for me. You know, a lot of people I meet are like, well, we had to make stuff up to confess, and you know, the priest was very like domineering and very like shame-based, and you're like, wow, this was like really lightening for my soul, and I love hearing that.
Thank you. That's, I just had a blessed attending the Catholic Church and, being in a convent and all that stuff. So
I'm always amazed when I meet people who like go to church and don't have like heavy religious baggage. Like, I want to be that person. Unfortunately, I got pretty full bags. Like I got a trailer of bags. But I'm committed to the thing, because I don't know where else we get to do this. Like I don't know anywhere else that gets to do the things we get to do. So hopefully we just do them better, like in a more life-giving way.
Well, I think you can stick your hand up, bend at the elbow and pat yourself on the back, because I think you do a wonderful job as a pastor, Father Mike.
Well, I much appreciate your affirmation. I'm just going to take a deep breath in. And now I want to honor our time. So
yeah, okay, I'm sorry.
No, I'm glad you had the last word and I'm grateful for it. We're not going to meet next week because it's like the day after Christmas. So we can do this again January 2nd, and we'll just do chapters 15 through 19, if that seems okay. That's 5 chapters. And hopefully I'll see you before then. But if not, I hope you have a holy Christmas time, and I'll see you January 2nd.
Blessed holiday, everybody.
Thank you.